let's begin. Back in the early 2000s, just as his GameMaker program was starting to gain a real following, creator Mark Overmars began providing links to free resources that amateur creators could use in their games. One of these, Resource Pack 2, collected by True Predator and posted to GameMaker.nl in 2003, is of particular note for including 129 individual MIDI files which were used in many early GameMaker games, including Red Hero, Puffy Starspeed, and Jumper. However, there is no documentation, on the site or in the pack itself, to suggest where any of these tracks came from or who made them. So let's find out. Before we embark on this journey, let me just do a bit of expectation setting. I would absolutely love to identify the individual MIDI arrangers associated with all of these tracks, but keeping in mind that the vast majority of these are over a quarter of a century old, we're going to have to take what we can get. Whether this means identifying the game that the song was originally from and crediting the original composer, or just laying out the full lack of information about a track, I'm gonna be honest about it. That being said, I will do my absolute best to fully identify and credit these tracks. Alright, let's dive in. The first crop of tracks in Resource Pack 2 are helpfully named after the game they're from. First up, we have 4 tracks labeled as being from Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. DK3 Purse 1.mid is a MIDI arrangement of the track Hot Pursuit from Donkey Kong Country 3, originally composed by Eveline Fischer and arranged for MIDI by Andreas and Savas Ulasoglou. Like most of the tracks that I have actual arrangement credits for, this information was contained within the metadata of the MIDI file itself. Shout out to the several commenters from my original 1945.mid video who suggested using this method for identifying the authors of unidentified MIDIs. This video would not be possible without you. The track itself is an intense chase theme, used in several levels throughout Donkey Kong Country 3. DKC3 Tree 1.mid is an arrangement of the track Treetop Tumble from DKC3, also by Eveline Fischer and arranged by the Ulasoglous as detailed in the metadata of the track. It was used in the game's forest area, unsurprisingly from the name, and sonically has a kind of dark and foreboding atmosphere that would be just as appropriate for an underwater level, especially given the choice of synth lead used here. DKC3 Under 1.mid, you know what, I'll loop back on this one. DKC3 Water 1.mid is the actual underwater theme from the game called Waterworld. It was once again, and appropriately, composed by Fischer and sequenced by the Ulasoglous. It has an even darker string pad with these unsettling piano arpeggios before the beat kicks in. Incidentally, when the game was ported to Game Boy Advance, an entirely new soundtrack was scored for the platform by David Wise, the composer of the original Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, and wouldn't you know it, it's just about time to get into those tracks. We start our survey of the original Donkey Kong Country soundtrack with DKC Choral 1.mid, also known as Aquatic Ambience, composed by David Wise and arranged by our old friends Andreas and Savas Ulasoglou. This is the underwater theme used in the game, and it is a beautiful example, in both the original SNES version and this MIDI arrangement, of how to evoke emotion using precise dynamics with highly restricted technology. While researching the script, I actually found this video from the channel Music Design that breaks down Wise's original track piece by piece in impressive detail. I'll link it in the description for those interested. Fans of my channel will recognize DKC Crank 1.mid as the Heaven's Mist theme from Red Hero, which we hear every time we talk to Floen, at least before. But back in my day, 3 years before my birth, the track was used when visiting Cranky Kong's cabin. This version was arranged for MIDI by John M. Kuzma. It is an upbeat marimba-led track that I enjoyed quite a bit for its light atmosphere. DKC Jung 1.mid is a masterwork of multi-part composition, once again originally put together by the talented David Wise and arranged here by Alluro95. This track is called DK Jungle Swing, also known as the Donkey Kong Country theme, and plays in several of the game's jungle theme levels. The first part of the track is an upbeat jazzy number, but halfway through it dissolves into a much more ambient mode, with background percussion accenting things more than driving it forward. It then seamlessly loops back into the upbeat section to make an unending Ouroboros of push and pull, tension and release. Also, the bongos make my brain go brrrr. DKC Cruel 1.1.mid is an arrangement of Gangplank Galleon, the final boss theme of Donkey Kong Country, where you fight the titular to the file name, King Cruel. Andreas and Savas Ulasso Glue are back with the MIDI arrangement, and it's great as ever. If you've ever encountered the RuneScape meme song Sea Shanty 2, you might enjoy this one as well, as the beginning part is an upbeat shanty-style tune that then transitions into a harder, more straight-ahead rock theme appropriate for a final boss fight. DKC Oil 1.1.mid evokes a frantic mood with its jittering piano riff and splatters of drums thrown throughout the intro. The track is known as Fear Factory and plays in Oil Drum Alley as well as Blackout Basement. I gotta say that I never had much time for this one as a kid, but I get it now. DKC Snow 1.mid is an arrangement of Northern Hemispheres, used in the Snow Barrel Blast and Ice Age Alley levels. This is a very dark and atmospheric track, initially dominated by a low drone and occasional interjections from high strings and repeated piano notes. Partway through the track, though, the scattershot ambience is replaced by an intense riff and the tone of the track shifts dramatically. It's a really cool effect. DKC Theme 1.mid is what it says on the tin. It is the official theme of Donkey Kong Country that plays over the intro and main menu, while Donkey Kong does this stance. It was composed, of course, by David Wise and arranged here by John S. Alright, now that we're done with all the Donkey Kong Country tracks, which by some stroke of luck we have all the arrangement credits for, let's move on to some that I had a bit more trouble with. Wait, what's that? I forgot something? Oh yeah, DKC3 under 1.mid. I said I'd leave that one till later. Well, I guess later's now, so here goes. DKC3 under 1.mid is one of the most commonly used MIDIs from this pack. It was in Maddie Thorson's Jumper, specifically playing over the infamous 3-4 level, and it was also the main theme to Sexy Hiking by Jazzu, which you might know better as the explicit inspiration for Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It. So why did I leave this Donkey Kong Country 3 underground theme until the end of the section? Well, because it's not the Donkey Kong Country 3 underground theme. Somewhere along the line, I can only assume when it was being coagulated into one MIDI pack or another, this track was mislabeled as being from Donkey Kong Country 3, when it is in fact from MetalTech Earthsiege, a mech piloting simulation DOS game from 1994. Shout out to Trogador from the Game Maker Games Discord server for tracking this one down. I may not have ever been able to find it otherwise. Unfortunately, I've been unable to track down an arranger for this track, which I can only find referred to as track 15, but we do know the music for the game was originally composed by Timothy Stephen Clark and Christopher Stevens, so they were the original composers of this gem. Now that we're done with the Donkey Kong tracks, let me take a very brief tangent here to talk about something you've probably already noticed. I'm talking, of course, about the way that the file names have that bracket 1 appended to them. This isn't universally true in Resource Pack 2, in fact, the very next track we'll cover doesn't have this, but there are a significant number of tracks that are suffixed by bracket 1 or bracket 2, so what's the deal with that? Well, it has to do with the way that these files were distributed back in the day. Many people with personal websites would curate a list of MIDIs that they just kinda liked and made available for download. In the README for Resource Pack 2, True Predator says that the files within the pack were curated from freeware collections, meaning that they likely downloaded a bunch of files from various sources across the internet and then repackaged their favorite ones. When downloading many files indiscriminately like that, you're likely to end up with some duplicates, and the default behavior if you download a file that has an identical name to a file already in the downloads folder is to append a bracket and the number of the copy to it. From this, we can tell that True Predator already had a copy of these Donkey Kong files, and then downloaded another copy and put the newer versions into Resource Pack 2 without bothering to remove the marker. Later on, we'll even encounter a couple of tracks that have a 2 appended to them, meaning that they were downloaded at least 3 times. Incidentally, this is part of the reason why finding credit for these tracks is so difficult when not embedded within the MIDI data itself. Because the tracks were downloaded and re-uploaded so many times by so many different parties, it's unsurprising that any author credits that may have accompanied the original upload would be lost in translation. Anyway, with that bit of business out of the way, let's get back into it. The next track is one I've had trouble finding the arranger for. Doom95.mid starts out with dark, droning strings that only get better when the beat kicks in. As the name suggests, this one was composed by Robert Bobby Prince for the Doom soundtrack level Episode 2, Map 6. Like the rest of the Doom soundtrack, it was inspired by contemporary 90s metal, and while some of the heaviness is perhaps lost in the MIDI format, it's still an enjoyable track. Next up, we have 3 tracks that share a theme, and I have had absolutely no luck identifying, and frankly, I'm hoping someone watching this video might recognize them from somewhere, or have a lead on how to track down more information, so here's everything I know. Firstly, we have Dreamed.mid, which is sort of a soft rock track that sounds like it could be a real song, although I've been unable to find anything that matches it from around the period when it was made. There's no useful metadata in the file itself either, as it contains no authorship notes and the track names just describe the instruments used in the song. Secondly, we have Dreaming.mid. This song starts out with a dramatic piano intro before bursting into a similar soft rock mode as Dreamed. Again, the metadata is no help, as it only has the instrument names, and as with Dreamed, the name is so generic that just searching the title, which often works for more unique file names, gives us nothing of use. Finally, we have DreamW1.mid. This track at least has a little bit more to go on than the others, but I've still been unable to find a credit for it. First of all, it was used in the early GameMaker game Puffy Starspeed, which was prominently featured on GameMaker.nl for several years. Perhaps more relevant to the search, it was uploaded to the defunct website FortuneCity.com to a page entitled My Personal MIDI Collection, along with other songs of the day such as Help by Beatles and Wonderwall by Oasis, but here it is only credited as a quote techno song. This leads me to believe that this one could be an original composition, but unfortunately I have no solid proof of this and certainly no leads on who might have sequenced it. Thanks to Shiriku Robot on the GameMaker Games Discord for locating the Fortune City page. But, leave a comment if you recognize it, I guess. The next song in the folder is Edgytech.mid, an intense techno track that I enjoy quite a bit, especially this breakdown. Examining the file, I could find no information on the metadata, and I resigned myself to this being another unidentified and uncredited one. But during my second pass, while searching for the track name, I found this on the site vogons.org, a forum for discussing DOS and old Windows hardware. In a November 2023 thread discussing hardware wavetables, user Zayfod77 posted, quote, "I suspect that Edgytech.mid. This is already a pretty cool find, but 4 months later, in March of this year, user Tim Wolf replied, "Very cool, someone still listens to one of my MIDI files from the 90s, back when I was the Dream Master. Thank you." So we have 100% confirmation that Edgytech.mid was an original composition by Tim Wolf, aka the Dream Master. Honestly, this is one of the coolest finds in my video. Just witnessing such a random happenstance interaction was super cool, and I'm very glad to have proper credit for this great track now. The next track is a MIDI rendition of Blue Dabadi by Eiffel65. In the comment section of the MIDI metadata, we can find that this version was sequenced by Izet Salonik on May 9th, 1999. Pretty cool. Einsfei.mid is a MIDI rendition of Einsfei Polizei, a 1995 Eurodance track by Mo Do. Unfortunately, I can't find an arranger credit for this one, but now at least you can enjoy the official video. Okay, we're done. Electra.mid is another completely unidentified track. It starts with these sharp, staccato piano notes before a foreboding organ comes in. This one is only about 1:15 long, and there isn't really a lot to go off of, so any leads on this one are highly appreciated. Elmer.mid took me a little while to track down. It's a slow, almost pastoral melody orchestrated with muted trumpets. In the metadata of the track itself, there's no useful information, just the word Elmer repeated several places. However, when searching for the file name online, I finally found the same track at this URL. After researching this, I finally located the track as coming from a 1989 DOS game, It Came from the Desert, which was modeled after 50s monster movies. In that game, you play as geologist Dr. Greg Bradley, who investigates a small desert town after a meteor impact, finding that the town's ants have been turned into giant monsters due to the effects of the crash. One of the many locations you can visit in the game is a service station, which is staffed by Elmer, and unsurprisingly, this is where the theme recreated by Elmer.mid plays. Unfortunately, I still cannot find an arrangement credit for this song, but I'm happy I was able to at least source the track to this game, and its composers, Greg Haggard and Jim Simmons. Eminem The Real Slim Shady.mid is unsurprisingly a MIDI rendition of The Real Slim Shady by Eminem. Unfortunately, there's no useful info in the metadata, so I cannot find an arrangement credit. The next crop of tracks are all from the Final Fantasy games, which you'd think would be easy to ID based on the names given here, but it turns out only about half of these names are accurate, so let me dive in. Firstly, we have FF3Boss.mid, which, based on the name, you'd think would be a Final Fantasy III boss theme, but it's not. It's actually the Final Fantasy VI boss theme, The Decisive Battle. Like all the music in the first 10 Final Fantasy games, this was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and this specific track was arranged for MIDI by Masashi Ito, which is specified in the MIDI track names. FF3 Chocobo.mid is exactly what it says on the tin, the song Chocobos from Final Fantasy III. Unfortunately, no arrangement credit for this one. It's a great track though. I remember using this one in my games all the time as a kid. It's so bright and energetic and incredibly catchy, and I'm just trying to fill more time for this section so I can listen to it a bit longer. Anyway, FF3 Town.mid was one I had a surprising amount of difficulty identifying for sure. I could tell you it was from Final Fantasy, given the name and the compositional style, but it wasn't the same as the actual Final Fantasy III town theme, so I had to just basically listen to every Final Fantasy OST looking for the town themes to try and identify it. Finally, I ID'd it as The Kids Run Through the City, the town theme from Final Fantasy VI. I really love the harmonic movement here and the harmonized woodwind leads. No arrangement credit for this one, unfortunately. Finally, FF5 Black Chocobo 5.mid is actually from Final Fantasy V, specifically the track Mambo de Chocobo, which translates to Chocobo Mambo. Well, okay then. Once you listen to it, you can tell this one is also a Chocobo theme due to the steel drum melody being lifted from the original FF3 Chocobo theme. This is kind of a fun tropical twist on that though, and I think it holds up well. Like the last two Final Fantasy tracks, I've been able to find no information on the arranger for this one. Firehawk.mid is a busy and intense number that I initially assumed was an original techno track along the lines of Edgy-Tech, and similarly had no useful metadata. But luckily, Shiriku Robot from the Game Maker Games Discord was there to point me to the original, Move On Baby by the Italian group Capella. An absolute banger if I do dare say, and accompanied by this masterpiece of a music video. Man, I hope this video doesn't get a copyright claim. No arrangement credit, unfortunately. Flintstones.mid is the Flintstones theme, originally composed by Hoyt Curtin, Joseph Barbera, and William Hanna for the popular classic vitamin shape, the Flintstones. A little known fact here, they actually made a short-running cartoon based on the characters portrayed in the vitamins. Pretty cool. This rendition was arranged by Don Carroll, as is detailed in the MIDI metadata. FrozenBuffalo.mid is a MIDI arrangement of the Blizzard Buffalo theme from 1995's Mega Man X3. This is all helpfully detailed in the MIDI metadata, which was quite useful for IDing this one since I never played the Mega Man games as a kid, and the file name of course is wrong and was likely altered at some point in its journey to Resource Pack 2. It was originally composed for the game by Kinuyo Yamashita, and this version was arranged by Justin Horn all the way back in 1997. Garfield.mid is a funny one. From the name, I obviously assumed it would be related to, you know, Garfield, the orange cat, hates mint. God damn it, Skitty. Garfield, the orange cat, hates Mondays? Right? Wrong. I checked every Garfield game, every one of his TV shows, everything I could find, and found no leads at all. This is one that I sent to the GameMaker Games Discord, along with the other handful I couldn't identify at all, and soon the trusty Shiriku robot had an answer. The MIDI was mirrored elsewhere on the internet under the name ToyStory.mid. Of course, once you hear it, it's obvious. It's an upbeat MIDI rendition of You've Got a Friend in Me by Randy Newman, nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1995 for its use in Toy Story. What threw me off here, I think, is the fanfare at the beginning of the track, which, from what I can tell, is not used in any other version of the song, and I guess was just added by the MIDI arranger, who unfortunately remains unknown. And then the person putting together the MIDI pack thought it had a Garfield vibe or something? I don't know. I give this one 4 out of 5 lasagnas. Yeah, this is a ratings video now. I give ratings. I rate... Okay. Genie in a Bottle.mid is a version of Christina Aguilera's Genie in a Bottle, written by professional songwriters Steve Kipner, David Frank, and Pam Shane. This version was expertly arranged by Deb Ackley, as is detailed in the metadata, along with the date the track was arranged, and for the first time in this project so far, her website, midihaven.com. This is of course entirely defunct now, but luckily we still have an incredible resource to be able to see it frozen in time. For now. Alright. In 2020, the publisher Hachette Book Group, along with Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, and Wiley, filed a lawsuit against the Internet Archive, colloquially known as archive.org, alleging the organization was committing copyright infringement through its practices of CDL, or Controlled Digital Lending. CDL-based libraries operate by digitizing physical copies of books, then making those physical copies unavailable for lending, while making a number of digital copies available that is exactly equal to the number of physical copies in the library's collection. These digital copies also typically have DRM embedded in them to prevent copying of the books while they're checked out, and keeping the number of digital copies in circulation equal to the number of physical copies owned by the library. In the lawsuit, the group of publishers alleged that the practice of CDL was illegal and not protected by fair use. In August 2023, John Codal ruled that the Internet Archive's use of CDL constituted a violation of copyright law, and an agreement was reached where the Internet Archive ceased all digital lending unless no ebook was available for sale from the publisher. On September 4th, 2024, the Internet Archive lost their appeal, meaning that over 500,000 titles that were previously available through CDL were now rendered permanently inaccessible for those who couldn't afford an ebook license. Anyway, this is bad and dumb, and libraries should be allowed to lend out books that they own. I don't think I have to make the case that having books available for free online is a net good for humanity, and that's exactly what CDL is. Keep in mind that this ruling doesn't only affect the Internet Archive, but all libraries. Countless libraries had online CDL programs, and after the ruling, it's likely they'll be forced to acquire ebook licenses for every book they want to lend online, even if they own a physical copy that they can pull off the shelves. I'm going to throw up some links on the screen and in the description for petitions and resources to try and support the IA in their ongoing fight to retain access to their CDL library titles, but on a larger level, support your local library. Libraries are great, and they're under constant threat of being defunded and regulated out of existence, so even if you don't think you'd use it, go sign up for a library card to help boost their numbers. And hell, maybe you'll find something cool while you're there. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah. Internet Archive also runs the Wayback Machine, which is the only way we can access Deb Ackley's website, midihaven.com. This is a great early internet website. We've got the tiling image background, colored text, a bunch of unrelated links, a hit counter, so much cool stuff. The list of MIDIs created by Deb is truly impressive. There are almost 650 songs here, mostly MIDI versions of real songs, and the variety is pretty incredible. There's not only Christina Aguilera, but Patsy Cline, Elvis Presley, Dionne Warwick, Toni Braxton, Jim Croce, Aerosmith, The Beach Boys, Bare Naked Ladies, Nat King Cole. No one can accuse her of not being prolific. While not as excessive as the covers page, the page of Deb Ackley originals is also not short. One of the greatest disappointments with this search, more than not being able to identify a particular song or an arranger, is the fact that these links never got archived. You better believe I would have done a standalone video called Reviewing All the Deb Ackley Originals. What might have been, eh? Hey, this is Editing Snail here. I have a bit of an addendum to this section, as I found out some more information about the site when going back to capture some more images for the edit. First of all, I need you to know that before the pictures I got earlier, MIDIhaven.com was split between the Deb Ackley MIDI Hub and a Demi Moore fan site. Unfortunately, most of this is broken, but the vibes are off the charts. Secondly, I navigated to a capture a year or so after the ones I used earlier, and I found this post on the top of the site. From January 27th, 2002. Per request from the licensing agency BMI, I have deleted all MIDI files except for the original files. BMI gave me two choices, to pay over $500 a year for the licensing fees or remove the MIDI files from my site. I chose to remove the files because I not only would have to pay BMI over $500 a year, I would also have to pay ASCAP over $500 a year, and I would have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Harry Fox agency every year. Not to mention providing all these agencies with quarterly logs of all the downloads, which would have been impossible since my web host does not provide complete logs of all downloaded files. I have not heard from ASCAP or HFA, but I had to assume that I would hear from them in the future. Since I make no profits from this site, and making MIDI files was just a hobby for me with the innocent intention of sharing my works with other hobbyists, I could not justify paying more than I'll make in my lifetime from my regular job to these licensing agencies, especially since MIDI files contain only text instructions which are sent to the sound card and can never be considered real music. Of course, I will never agree that MIDI files should be subject to licensing fees. It is totally wrong to charge licensing fees to the generous people who simply want to share their MIDI files with others on the web. It is very sad that they are focusing their attention on MIDI sites instead of the sites that distribute audio files, i.e., real music. Deleting the MIDI files that I've spent more than 4 years creating was like sticking a knife in my heart. It was a sad day, but I will survive. While I disagree with her about MIDI's value as real music, it's incredibly unfair that BMI caused Deb Ackley to delete her entire catalog of MIDI covers and essentially quit her hobby. This is a bitter reminder of the culture that surrounded music piracy around the turn of the millennium, and we should all keep in mind to pirate more media in the future as revenge. Anyway, back to the show. Anyway, with that entertaining tangent out of the way, let's return to the task at hand, and continue our search with Ghostbusters.mid. This is, of course, a MIDI rendition of the Ghostbusters theme, originally by Ray Parker Jr. and allegedly lifted from Huey Lewis and the News, and in this version sequenced by D.W. Barnes. It rocks. It's the Ghostbusters theme. What else is there to say? In grnhill1.mid, we encounter our first MIDI that's a version of a track from Sonic. But not our last. Oh, not our last. Let's just say there's something coming up that I've dubbed the Sonic Gauntlet. We'll talk about it later. This one is an interestingly piano-led rendition of the Green Hill Zone theme from the first Sonic game, composed originally by Masato Nakamura. Unfortunately, we don't have an arrangement credit for this one, but at least we do, more or less, have credits for the other 3 versions of the Green Hill Zone that we'll get to later, so look forward to that, I guess. Gym.mid is a MIDI version of the Pokemon Gym theme from the original Pokemon Red and Blue, originally composed by Junichi Masuda. Unfortunately, we don't have an arrangement credit for this one, so I can only give it 3 out of 5 Gengars. Gym Battle.mid is, of course, Battle vs. Gym Leader, also from Pokemon Red and Blue and composed by Junichi Masuda. Luckily here, the metadata is intact and includes both the sequencer, Skewer, and an admonishment to MIDI distributors to keep the credits and the track names intact. You're doing the Lord's work here, Skewer. The metadata also includes a website, which, while not as fantastic as Deb Ackley's, it does contain this message asserting MIDIs as a legitimate form of intellectual property and forbidding that their MIDIs be used without permission or included in collections. Whoops. Unfortunately, like Deb Ackley's sites, all the links, including to Skewer's respectable list of original compositions, are broken, and therefore I cannot do my Skewer Reviewer spin-off video. Next in the folder, we have HappyBirthday.mid, which is actually another Deb Ackley arrangement. Bit of a personal story here. Back when we were kids, me and my friends would always make little games for each other's birthdays, and this would usually be the soundtrack to them, at least in the early years. Eventually, though, we started to get tired of using the same song for every game, so we would start switching around all the instruments, like this one, labeled Depressing Birthday. It's pretty great. Next up is a track called I Miss You.mid. I don't know anything about this one. There's nothing in the metadata, nothing online. It's named like it may be a real song, but it sounds very medieval and is also very short. This is one that I think would really benefit from wider exposure, so if you recognize this one, please leave a comment. J0074315.mid is a cool one, so buckle up, we've got a lot to cover. First of all, the track itself is a very nice, mellow, vibraphone-led affair with a syncopated rhythm behind it. It's only 32 seconds long, but even in this short time, it makes an impression. Longtime viewers who actually go out and play the games I talk about might recognize this song as the one that plays in Red Hero when you're purchasing upgrades from the Dark Energy store, but I always associated it with script supervisor Reknep's old platformer, Jolly, who is legally distinct from Meshoff's Wally. Digging into the MIDI metadata, we find some interesting things. First of all, the track name is written down as Global, which rolls off the tongue quite a bit better than J0074315.mid. And intriguingly, it's listed as being copyrighted to the Microsoft Corporation 1998. In the comments section is written Stan Lepard-Panther Modern. Looking into this, it turns out that Panther Modern is the music company of one Stan Lepard, and that he worked on a ton of stuff. Halo 3, Plants vs. Zombies, Guild Wars 2, Destiny, Microsoft Encarta 97, Microsoft Flight Simulator, Age of Empires 3, the list goes on. He also has a lot of original music. On his SoundCloud, you can find the album Vibramax Improvised Live Electronic Grooves Formulated for Enhanced Living, a collaboration with sound designer Jerry Schroeder that has an eye-watering 93 tracks. Perhaps one of Lepard's best-known works is the so-called hidden Windows XP song. This song wasn't actually hidden, it was meant to play while XP was being installed, but not many users have their audio drivers set up at that point, so the majority only found the file in the System32 folder well after the fact. This is an absolutely beautiful track, combining warm, sweeping synth strings with a coldly mechanical beat and groovy bass line, and evoking a really unique feeling with the combination. It's just really good. Since Lepard did so much work for Microsoft back in the day, and the Global MIDI file is copyrighted to them, I figured this was probably made for another Microsoft project, and Shiriku Robot from the GameMaker Games Discord confirmed this with the discovery that the MIDIs starting with J0074 originate from the Microsoft Clip Art search feature, and that this particular track could also be found on the installation disk for Microsoft Graphics Studio 99. In 2021, fellow composer McLean Deemer made the following now-deleted tweet. I'm deeply saddened to say that last week, my friend and colleague Stan Lepard passed away unexpectedly. Knowing him helped shape and change the course of my life and my music. He was a big part of my work for Guild Wars 2, in addition to his own musical contributions to the game. I don't want to linger on this too long, especially since everything I would say has already been said better by Kevin Perjurer in his seminal 2022 video essay, Disney Channel's Theme, A History Mystery. But the work of commercial artists is vitally important, and there's so much craft and expression that goes into even the most frivolous seeming work. Generative AI will likely never threaten the livelihoods of quote-unquote real artists, whose work is seen as a personal expression, but what it will do is usurp the work of people like Stan Lepard, because studios will figure that nobody will care if they replace the work of a master craftsman like Lepard with something that kind of gestures in the same direction, for a fraction of the price. But to rob ourselves of beauty and quality and craft in the day-to-day is to cut pieces from ourselves until we lived in a genericized, empty world devoid not only of beauty, but of care, of things that took time and attention and expertise to make. That's not a future I'm particularly interested in. Jennifer Page-Crush.mid is a MIDI cover of the song Crush by Jennifer Page. I give it 4 out of 5 pages. The next track is one of the best in the entire collection. KevTech is a techno track that goes incredibly hard. Around the 2-minute mark, there's this really cool part where the entire song slows down and seems to end, but then comes back with a breakdown of sorts, slowly adding all the instruments back in. It's super cool. The metadata doesn't contain any info in the track names or notes sections, which are the usual suspects for finding credits in this sort of track. But luckily, if we look further, we can actually find details in the cues. These are meant to divide the song into different sections, such as intro, verse, chorus, etc., but they're also another place where MIDI composers sometimes put their names, and here we can see that this track was an original composed all the way back in 1995 by a Kevin Newman. Oh, I get it, Kevin Techno. By googling the included email address, I was actually able to find an archived email from the original MIDI news group where KevTech was shared. This is just really cool. Talking to other GameMaker users from this era in the GameMaker Games Discord server, there was a broad consensus that this is one of the best tracks in the entire resource pack, and I have to agree, so I'm very glad to have found a credit for it. It's just that good. Okay. I think it's about time we took a little break from our main breakdown to run the numbers. When I first started working on this script, I created a big spreadsheet where I could track all the information I had about each track. That spreadsheet is a mess, but it did give me a cool idea that once I'd gathered all the information I could, I'd go in and do some statistics on it. And by statistics, I mean neat charts. The first stat we'll look at is breaking down the MIDIs by origin. I don't mean the composer or arranger or anything, just where the original song came from. What was it made for? Looking at all 129 MIDIs, our numbers look like this. The vast majority, over 2/3 of the tracks, are covers of video game music of some type or another. Covers of existing songs are the next largest category at around 12%, meaning that the MIDI is a version of an existing pop, classical, or rock song. TV and movie themes make up the next largest slice, and then tied in last place, original compositions and tracks of indeterminate origin. Given that such a big slice of the MIDIs are from video games, I was curious, what's the breakdown on what games these tracks originate from? When we look at this chart, we see that the pack is largely dominated by the Sonic games. Indeed, 69%, again over 2/3, of the video game music in this pack originates from one of the Sonic titles featured therein. Sonic 2 is the most represented game, very narrowly followed by Sonic 1, then Sonic and Knuckles, then Sonic 3. Outside of Sonic, the Donkey Kong Country games are the next most represented, around 11%, then Super Mario Bros., the Final Fantasy series, and Pokemon Red and Blue are each tied at 4.4%. Finally, other games make up 7%. You remember me mentioning the Sonic Gauntlet earlier? Well, maybe these statistics will give you some idea of the scale of what is to come. Speaking of, let's dive into things with a small preview of that. Knuckles1.mid, unsurprisingly from the name, is the song Theme of Knuckles from the game Sonic & Knuckles. This was originally composed by Howard Drawson, Sachio Ogawa, Tatsuyuki Maeda, and Jun Senoue. And this rendition was arranged by Paul Lapinski, who we will be seeing more of later in this pack. Let's Go to the Battle.mid always makes me think of that Let's All Go to the Lobby song from old movies, but after going through the somewhat confusing metadata, which I believe is Japanese characters that were mangled by the text encoding, I was able to identify it as actually being the Dracula's Castle theme from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, originally composed by Michiru Yamane with arrangements made by Akira Pito and Rika Muranaka. The MIDI version here was arranged by Harpoon, Turbo. I'm unsure if this means that the track was put together by two people named Harpoon and Turbo, or one called Harpoon, Turbo, but either way, the version here is great. I give it 5 out of 6 blood. Limp Bizkit Take a Look Around.mid is a cover of Limp Bizkit's Take a Look Around, which of course samples the Mission Impossible theme prominently early on before the infectious rap rock beat kicks in. Unfortunately, I don't have an arrangement credit for this, but nonetheless, I give it 19 out of 27 Dursts. Lontala.mid sounds at first to be an interesting fantasy-styled song, perhaps appropriate for a village theme for an RPG, but when we look into the metadata, it turns out that this isn't fantasy, it's original. The tune, titled When Thou Must Home, was composed in 1601 by Thomas Campion, a notable lute player of the time, for Book of Airs, written by Philip Rossiter. This version was sequenced by John Cowles. Oh yeah, also Thomas Campion was childless, never married, named Philip Rossiter his sole heir before his death in 1620, and wrote a lute song called I Care Not for These Ladies. So, LosingReligion.mid is a cover of R.E.M's Losing My Religion from their 1991 album Out of Time. Losing My Religion is a highly interesting piece of songcraft in that none of the lines in the song rhyme with each other, which has absolutely no impact on the MIDI version, where Michael Stipe's baritone is replaced by a banjo. Huh. No arrangement credit on this one. Memories.mid is an arrangement of Pachelbel's canon in D with some techno flavor thrown in. Arrangements of this type were kind of a thing back in the day, and I remember early YouTube being full of people shredding over this progression. However, let me gripe for a second here about the difficulty of searching for things many years after the fact. This track, and the next one in the folder, which is titled Memories1.mid, are both called, well, Memories. I also know I heard the Pachelbel progression referred to as Memories often back in the day, but I never actually knew why, so being curious, I started looking. And let me just say that Maroon 5 has absolutely trashed the SEO for this. Their 2019 song Memories, which of course is also based on this progression, has absolutely made it impossible to search anything like, why is Pachelbel's canon called Memories, because the results are nothing but that insipid piece of work. And the song he sings too. Anyway, Memories is pretty good, but has no arranger listed, and Memories 1 is also pretty good, though it's a more straight-ahead arrangement of the tune and was sequenced by Joan Tan. I give them both 8 out of 11 cats from Cats. Mortal Kombat.mid is another one I remember using all the time in my games as a kid, and was one of the first tunes I learned on piano when I started teaching myself that around the same time. This is, of course, the Mortal Kombat theme, but what I didn't know going in is that the song is actually named Techno Syndrome, which is fantastic. The song was composed by Belgian techno group The Immortals, consisting of Maurice Praga Khan Engelen and Oliver Adams. The MIDI version heard here was sequenced by Gus Zant and is an absolute classic. This is one that was for sure on the Best of Resource Pack 2 mix CD that I made back in the day. That's real, by the way, I actually made that. Night.mid is another R.E.M. cover, this time of Night Swimming from Automatic for the People. This version was arranged by Christopher J. Roy. This time, Michael Stipe's voice is replaced with a synth voice that goes do-do-do. It's pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie. Ninja.mid is our next unidentified track. I actually had a viewer ask specifically about this track in the comments of my video tracking down the author of the 1945 tutorial music. Quote, "My holy grail game maker song that I've been searching for years is Ninja.mid. I used it for a maze game of mine that I'm actually still improving and expanding today, 16 years later. Ninja has always been the game's main theme. I wish I could find proper credit like you did, but all my searchings have turned up empty so far." To be transparent, I also haven't found any leads whatsoever with this song. The metadata is a whole lot of nothing, and the file name is way too generic to be searchable in any meaningful way. Here's the thing though. Shortly before the 1945 video came out, I would swear that I heard this riff on the radio. Like, I have a tangible memory of this. I even remember noting at the time that it was the song from Balloon Trouble in Fallen Master's original minigames. But maddeningly, I didn't stick around to hear any of the lyrics, and I didn't Shazam the song, so I still have no idea what it was. Or maybe I dreamed the whole thing. It's quite possible. Anyway, if anyone recognizes this song, please leave a comment. Please God, someone tell me I'm not crazy. Nitrotech.mid honestly sounds kind of broken as it's played on my sound chip. I think it's an issue with the note offs not triggering, but if this is how it's supposed to sound, sorry. In the metadata, we can see that the track is supposed to be named Techno Mikey and was composed and sequenced by a guy named Keith Spillman. And oh man, we're in for a treat for this one. Keith Spillman has one of the best old websites I've come across. You know you're in for a good time when you're greeted by a website pop-up warning like this. Quote, Hello, my name is Keith Spillman. Welcome to the Little Kitchen. Crank up the volume and enjoy the tunes. The following pages include several Java scripts, Shockwave, and a bunch of pictures. Don't worry, all you haters of the previously mentioned items, there's a way around it. If you have a slow connection or an older browser, you may experience difficulties in viewing and hearing everything on these pages. So, it's up to you. Do you press OK and travel on into the unknown, or press cancel and retreat to safety? If we proceed, we are greeted by this delightful homepage, complete with the very noisy tiled background, an early CG kitchen, animated GIFs, links to web rings, the whole 9 yards. I'm also given to believe that there was supposed to be auto-playing background music here, though this feature is broken on the archive.org snapshot. To proceed, we have to click into the CG Kitchen image, and we're taken to another great page with a starry background and many long neon-colored blocks of text. This page helpfully gives us the option to select between quick loading but stripped down, and slow loading but more featured versions of the main site. After another warning, we're taken to the site proper, featuring some more epic GIFs and a long list of various tracks to download. The cherry on top of the whole thing is the bio. This is a 770-word essay, picked out in hot pink against a starry background. Throughout the bio, certain phrases and words are highlighted, and these links lead to downloadable WAV files that were miraculously archived by the Wayback Machine, so we can still experience this bio as it was meant to be read. I can't quite justify reading it in its entirety, but I'll excerpt some highlights here because this is just too good to be missed. Hi there, I'm Keith, aka Head Cheese. That's my name in Quake, a game that I was hopelessly addicted to a while back. I am 39 years old, and I have a wife and 2 kids. My daughter is 19, and my son is 14. I've been married for 20 long years, but it's been really nice. I am a maintenance supervisor for RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company. I've been there for about 20 years. Now, wait a minute. Before you go off and think, oh no, he works for an evil tobacco company, trust me, the crap you hear through the media is just that.
That's
crap.
C-R-A-P.
We are hardworking folks just trying to make a living making a product that people have known all there is to know about for over 100 years. We just happen to be the unlucky recipients of way too much publicity lately, since Clinton declared war on us to take the heat off himself and made us politically incorrect. My pet car is a 1967 427 Cobra replica that I built in the basement. It is a very fast car, 12 seconds quarter mile, with a Ford 427 stroker engine pulling out around 500 horsepower. It only weighs 2,700 pounds, so it's a blast to drive. It's won over 50 awards at car shows, including several Best of Show trophies. The last show I went to was a Ford Mopar show. I had the opportunity to pick a fight with a Dodge Viper GTS. Guess who won? This is it. We found it. The best website. In addition to all this, there's also a link to Keith's page on mp3.com, which is unfortunately defunct, and all the MP3 links broken, but this did get me thinking about searching for Techno Mikey by name, and I actually found an MP3 version of the song on archive.org that doesn't sound like
C-R-A-P.
so that's pretty awesome actually. I did a bit more digging, and it seems like Keith Spillman is still on the internet running his own YouTube where he documents beekeeping, car repair, and a variety of other topics along with miscellaneous music stuff. If you're interested, I recommend you go check it out. I'll link it in the description. Our next track to review is NoTechno.mid, and I believe it's the earliest MIDI in the collection that we have a date for, as it's dated all the way back to 1990, 34 years ago as of the release of this video. It doesn't have a specific person listed as the author, but it is credited to Voyatra Technologies, which produced MIDI sequencing software in the late 80s and early 90s, so maybe it was a demo track or something. Unfortunately, I cannot find further info on who in particular sequenced NoTechno, but it's pretty groovy and I dig it, so if it was you, leave a comment. I give this one 5 out of 6 defunct software companies. Obsession.mid is another real banger, I dare say. The MIDI file does contain full metadata this time, which details the name of the track is actually Obsessive, an original song by Andre Kruger. However, I was curious and hungry for more info, so I started searching the file name and actually came across a Reddit thread from a few months ago where user Graphic0 was searching for the sources of a bunch of MIDIs from a 2004 Russian game. Someone had already identified Obsessive as being one of the tracks in the game, and among the others were the same version of Ein Zwei Polizei we looked at earlier, and another track from the resource pack that we have yet to cover. Because of this, I decided to give the whole game soundtrack a listen to see if I could help with the search, and lo and behold, I was able to identify not one, not two, but 3 additional songs. One of them was kevtech.mid, which we already covered, and another was techrap.mid, which I'll get to near the end of this video after the Sonic Gauntlet. The last one, though, actually wasn't from Resource Pack 2 at all, but this is as good a time as any to talk about it. After my video tracking down the source of the 1945 song blew up, I spent a long time racking my brains on how to do a proper follow-up in order to capitalize on the success and keep my new audience engaged. I ended up discovering some stuff that gave me enough material for a direct follow-up video, and this video that you're watching right now is in many ways a spiritual sequel to the 1945 video, but my first and most immediate thought was, of course, where did the other GameMaker 6 tutorial musics come from? For those who don't know, those other tutorials were Asteroids, a remake of the arcade game Asteroids, and Street Racer, which is probably a remake of another game, but I don't know which one off the top of my head. Let's just say Strikers 1945. The Asteroids music is pretty straightforward. This one was identified by Hikari no Yume in the 1945 video comments, and independently by Chair G Table, who also helped me a lot with the searches in this video. The track is simply the Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards boss battle theme, which does explain why it goes so hard. The Street Racer theme had me stumped for longer, but I got an answer independently from Shiriku Robot in the GMG Discord and at Mr. K Soft in the 1945 video comments. His message read, at SnailmanDev. As an insane MIDI searcher, I've done some research on this and have some info, though not a definitive answer. The file can be found on the companion CD for the 2000 book Delphi Graphics and Game Programming Exposed with DirectX 7.0 by John Ayres. This may very well be the original source Mark Overmars got it from, as GM was originally written in Delphi. Anyway, the file appears as custom16.mid along 3 other MIDIs. I found a copy of the book online, and in the acknowledgments section, the author credits a David Strahan for providing, quote, MIDI music compositions used in some of the examples, end quote. I have not found any more info on this guy yet. I also noticed that the file's actual timestamp on the CD is from September 23rd, 1995, so it may have been floating around even earlier, hence why this isn't definitive. Hope that helps. Again, thank you to Mr. K Soft for that, it does help. I too have searched every way I can for a David Strahan who made MIDIs back in the day, also with no luck. As always, if anyone has information on this, please drop a comment. Anyway, all this to say that one of the tracks in Graphic0's search was the very same custom16.mid, aka the Street Racer theme. So I sent him a Reddit DM with all of this info, explaining where the songs came from, and theorizing that perhaps the creators of the game were GameMaker users and/or found the Resource Pack 2, or a pack from which it was partially built. There are still 2 more tracks outstanding in that search, and I'm going to play them quickly here to see if anybody has any information, even though we are way off track from the point of this video. But you know what? No, I can do what I want, and I will put tangents in my tangents if I want to. It's my channel. Everybody shut up! Overworld.mid is not an Overworld theme, it's Mars, the bringer of war from the planets by Gustav Holst. Famously, this suite was used as filler music in the original Star Wars before John Williams composed the final score, and Mars in particular was the inspiration for the Imperial March. This MIDI version of the piece was sequenced by Jack Hines, as is detailed in the metadata. Pallet Town.mid is another Pokemon Red and Blue cover, this time the theme from Surprise Surprise, Pallet Town. No arranger credit on this one, unfortunately, but the original, like the other Pokemon tracks we've looked at so far, was composed by Junichi Masuda. Pink Panther.mid is the theme from the 1963 comedy mystery film of the same name, composed by Henry Mancini. It is iconic, and this is a faithful recreation of it, though the arranger is unknown. I give this 6 out of 8 Pink Panthers. Are you guys tired of this yet? Now that's a video. That's an hour of runtime that justifies its existence. This, though, I mean, S2 Casino2.mid isn't the beginning of the Sonic Gauntlet yet, but a warning shot. This is, of course, a cover of the Casino Night Zone 2-player version from Sonic 2. Like all the Sonic 2 music, it slaps, and was composed originally by Masato Nakamura. This version was sequenced by John Weeks, who we'll be seeing more of later in the pack. S3 Special.mid is the special stage theme from Sonic 3, sequenced again by Paul Lapensee. The Sonic 3 score's authorship has long been disputed and surrounded with the rumor that Michael Jackson worked on it. From what I can tell, though, his contributions have been vastly overblown in the years since, and the actual composition work on the game was a collaborative effort of a large team, including Brad Buxer, Bobby Brooks, Daryl Ross, Jeff Grace, Doug Grigsby III, Sirocco Jones, and Howard Drawson. Anyway, this track is excellent. I used it as the theme for one of my early releases called Snail Man's Search for Candy, the concept of which came to me in a dream. For a bit of a Sonic reprieve, we have Sahara.mid, which I haven't been able to identify at all, let alone figure out an arrangement credit for. It opens with this very cool and disorienting rhythmic section before the more Sahara-y section kicks in. As always, if anyone has a lead on this one, please drop a comment. Scooby-Doo.mid is a MIDI cover of the Scooby-Doo Where Are You theme, composed originally by David Mook and Ben Raleigh, and arranged for MIDI here by Kirk Renda. I give it 12 Scooby Snacks out of 15. The next 2 tracks are renditions of the Simpsons theme, originally composed by Danny Elfman, and neither of which I have an arrangement credit for. They are imaginatively titled Simpsons 1.mid and Simpsons 2.mid. Of the two, I think Simpsons 1 is a more faithful version with regard to the arrangement and instrumentation, as Simpsons 2 makes some interesting choices in those areas that I think hurts the overall vibe. They're both like, fine though, I don't know. We all knew this would come. I've been alluding to it for a long time, maybe dreading it. I was hoping something would happen and I wouldn't have to go through with it, but the time and the words just kept slipping through my fingers, and now I'm standing before the gates with no escape. I'm out of options. It's time for the Sonic Gauntlet. Let's be clear what we're in for. I've covered 62 tracks in this pack so far, and the next 61 songs, all but 4 of them are Sonic. We do get a single merciful oasis of other songs about 10 songs in, but other than that, it's unrelenting Sonic. We've got Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, hell, even a song from Sonic CD. A bunch of these are repeats too. We've got multiple different arrangements of Green Hill Zone, Marble Zone, Scrap Brain Zone, and more. From this point to nearly the end of the video, we are entering the world of Sonic. And though we may emerge from it at the end, we will not be the same, you and I. No. We will never be the same again. So let's begin. The first group of tracks we're going to look at here are from Sonic and Knuckles, and were all composed by Howard Drawson, Sachio Ogawa, Tatsuyuki Maeda, and Jun Senoue. First First up is skmini1.mid, which is an arrangement of the mini-boss theme by John Weeks, who you'll remember from the Casino Night 2-player cover we looked at earlier in the video. I'm gonna go ahead and start a running counter of all the Sonic sequencers here, because we're gonna be seeing a lot of familiar faces. skndegg11.mid is the Death Zone Act 1 theme, an intense and driving tune that was here sequenced by Paul Lapensee, who also did the S2 Casino 2.mid and Snailman Search for Candy theme, S3 Special, from earlier. SKNF Bat 2 1.mid plays in the Flying Battery Zone Act 2, and is another John Weeks arrangement. It's good. Listen. SKNF Boss 1.mid is the Doomsday Zone theme, this time sequenced by newcomer Corian. SKN Flirm 2.mid is from the Flying Battery Zone. It's labeled as a remix in the MIDI metadata, but honestly I don't know how much remixing occurred between the original version and this, besides the translation to MIDI. Unfortunately, missing from the metadata is any information on who arranged this version of the track. Also unfortunately missing at the end of the song, it just kind of stops halfway through. SKN Invin 2.mid is the song that plays when you get invincibility, and is thus a little bit repetitive as a song, but is still enjoyable and energetic. This is another Paul Lapensee arrangement. SKN Lava 1 2.mid is another Paul Lapensee arrangement, this time of the Lava Reef Zone Act 1. This is, I believe, a truncated version as it ends after only 1 minute, whereas the original goes on a little bit longer. SKN Lava 2 1.mid, wait, didn't I just do this? SKN Lava 2 1, okay. SKN Lava 2 1 is the Lava Reef Zone Act 2 theme, and there's no arranger listed in the metadata, unfortunately. I really do like the arrangement of this one, as I think the addition of the much heavier snare tone actually emphasizes the offbeat much more, which leads the whole track to have a lot more rhythmic interest than the original. It's cool. Next up, we finally have a direct head-to-head shootout between our two Sonic Arranger big boys, Paul Lapensee and John Weeks, here both covering the Mushroom Hill Zone Act 1. Both arrangements are quite good and mostly faithful recreations, although I will say that neither of them have the lightly swung rhythm of the original track. Between the two, I think Weeks' arrangement is more faithful in terms of the instrument and sound choices, but I actually give the narrow edge to Lapensee's in terms of my enjoyability, due to the tasteful use of reverb effects for the lead, and again utilizing the heavier MIDI snare tone, which I think gives the track more bang. SKN Sand 2 1.mid is a John Weeks arrangement of the Sandopolis Zone Act 2. After writing this sentence, I kept getting distracted for multiple minutes on end and then returning to the script expecting I had written something more interesting here, but I didn't. Sorry, I guess. SKN Sky 1.mid is an energetic, bright tune brought to you again by Paul Lapensee, and once again using his favorite MIDI snare sound. Honestly, I find it a little bit out of place here, like the original version doesn't have a strong backbeat, and adding it here feels a little odd and scattershot. And yeah, I know that's basically the same thing I praised in his version of the Mushroom Hill Zone, but that felt like a case of emphasizing an existing backbeat, while this feels a lot more like just inventing one out of whole cloth. Anyway. SK Sand 12 1.mid is a John Weeks arrangement of the Sandopolis Zone Act 1. Honestly, it's nearly identical to the Act 2 version that we heard already, which is also true of the originals, though here I do prefer this version over the other slightly for its faster tempo and a more interesting lead instrument of a chimey pad rather than the clarinet on the Act 2 version. And with that, we're done with the Sonic and Knuckles OST entries from this pack. We're about a quarter way through the Sonic Gauntlet, but here we have a very short intermission of 4 tracks from the obscure 1985 title Super Mario Bros. All these tracks, of course, were originally composed by the incredible Koji Kondo. First up, we have SM1 Theme 1.mid, a quite straight-ahead arrangement of the original Super Mario Bros. Theme, or Ground Theme as it was originally titled. This version was sequenced by PJ Barnes, and is a faithful recreation of the original. Our next track is an interesting case. The name SMB Over 1.mid seems to imply that this track is the Game Over theme, which does use a motif from the main theme. Hey, Editing Snail here. I just realized while editing this section that It's probably called SMB Over 1 because it's the overworld theme, and for no other or deeper reason. So, disregard all of that. Thanks. The lead instrument to warble their way to the end. Finally, we have two versions of the Super Mario Bros. Underwater theme. The first, SMB Watt 2.1.mid, seems to be striving for more accuracy, using the MIDI square wave instrument to try and approximate the sound of the NES sound chip. This version was sequenced by Eric at VBE.com. The second, SMB Water 1.mid, again sequenced by PJ Barnes, takes a few more liberties with the instrumentation, opting for a piano and jazz guitar arrangement, but I think it turns out quite well, although both are good covers. Alright, now back to Sonic Purgatory. Our next run of tracks all come from Sonic 1, and were therefore originally composed by Masato Nakamura. We're going to see some familiar arrangers in this section, but also some newcomers, and some potentially interesting mysteries. So let's dive in. Sun 1 Cred 1.mid is the credits theme, and I actually used it in my very first released game as the credits music, so I still have a really big soft spot for it. I love how it incorporates sections from a bunch of other tracks from the game as it goes on. I always love it when credits musics do that. This version was arranged by... well, we don't really know, but I want you to take note of the formatting of the metadata here. Notice how the format of the track name has the game name, a colon, then the specific track, the copyright date, and by Sega in the comments. I know some of this metadata is standardized by Noteworthy Composer, which this track was notated in, but just keep that exact format in mind. Sun 1 Final 1.mid is the Final Zone theme. Note in the metadata here the track name, copyright, and by Sega in the track comments. Again, I only have circumstantial evidence to suggest that these tracks were done by the same person. However, that's good enough for me, so I'm going to start a tally of these tracks that appear to be authored by the same person. Let's call him Vice President Spiro T. Agnew. Next up, we have 3 covers of the Green Hill Zone theme. This in addition to the piano version we looked at earlier in the video. Sun 1 Gurnhill 1.mid is an interesting mix of the song, using an electric piano as the intro instrument and emphasizing the chords in the mix way more than they are in the other versions. Honestly, this is the most accurate of all the mixes, as the E-piano timbre actually nails the original version perfectly, as does the mix of the instrumentation. This version was arranged by Aluro95, who you'll remember from arranging Donkey Kong Country Swing, which we looked at the better part of an hour ago at this point. This arrangement also has something very, very rare, maybe the only one I've found in all these MIDIs, a website link that still works. The last update is still listed as being 23 years ago, but somehow this website is still up, and it has all the greatest hits of the era. Gradients, seemingly random text colors that strain the retina, so many animated GIFs. This is not only a site for Alura's MIDIs, but they were also a big Dragon Ball Z stan back in the day, it seems. One thing I will say is that, compared to the other sites which have been long archived, I forgot how many obnoxious pop-up ads this type of homepage used to have. Like, I get it, you gotta pay for hosting, but this is part of the old internet I don't miss. Sun 1 Hill 2.mid is another version of the Green Hill Zone theme, this time arranged by newcomer Jarl Jones. This one has always been my favorite version of the Green Hill Zone from this pack, just because it mixes up the instrumentation a bit more from the original one, and uses some cool reverb effects later on in the track. I think it's well done. The final Green Hill Zone we have to look at is Sun 1 Hill 1.mid, which is an interestingly piano-led rendition of the Green Hill Zone theme from the first Sonic game, composed originally by Wade. I can't shake the feeling that we've been here before. In GRN Hill 1.mid, we encounter our first MIDI that's a version of a track from Sonic. Yeah, so this is the same version of the Green Hill Zone as the one we looked at earlier. Fortunately enough, we do actually have an arrangement credit of sorts for this one, as the metadata says it was taken from www.alphalink.com.au/squigglythingcozy. I gather AlphaLink was kind of like the GeoCities of Australia, so this would mean the homepage of the arranger of this version of Green Hill was Cozy, so I guess that takes care of 2 uncredited tracks in one. The next track we have to look at is Sun 1 Labby 1.mid, which is a version of the Labyrinth Zone theme. Because I always thought of that track as more iconic, and it comes earlier in the pack, I always thought of this track as having the same melody from the credits music, even though I know it's actually the other way around. Unfortunately, no arrangement credit for this one. Next, we tackled 3 different versions of the Marble Zone theme. The first, Sun1Mar2 1.mid, is uncredited, but I like the striking use of piano in the intro that keeps the beat relatively low-key throughout, but I think it does what it needs to do. Huh? I don't know what I was trying to say here. Sun1Mar3 1.mid is from the returning Gerald Jones, and has a much more driving beat behind it with his constant hi-hat figure running through the whole song. As much as I dig the understated version we heard before, this one just feels a lot more complete to me, and I enjoy the slightly delayed background strings as well, as they give the song an almost organic breathing quality. As for Sun1Marb 1.mid, well, based on some similarities in the notation and arrangement, I actually believe this to be the finished version of the first Marble track zone we looked at, Sun1Mar2 1.mid. Some of the instruments have been changed around, and it's been polished up quite a bit, but the smoking gun for me is this one bar of 1/4 that leads into the 4/4 body of the song, which is a pretty specific way to notate that beginning, and along with other similarities such as the order of the tracks, I'm comfortable saying that that first version we looked at was a work-in-progress version of this one. This is, by the way, a John Weeks arrangement, which means that the other one retroactively was as well. I think I prefer the Jones version slightly, but this one is probably a more faithful recreation of the original track, as we have come to expect from Weeks, and I respect that. Sun1Skr2 1.mid is a Gerald Jones arrangement of the Scrat Brain Zone theme, and one I have a particular soft spot for. You see, my first released game, Escape from Malkin, which I alluded to earlier, used this as the primary background music for its first set of levels, so it has an undeniable nostalgia for me. This arrangement is a lot heavier than the original, which seems to be a hallmark of Jones's style, but in this case, I think that really works, and I will always have a soft spot for this track for that reason. Sun1Skra 1.mid, being the other arrangement of that tune in this pack, was never going to live up to my favorite version of the track, but I certainly think it's interesting. The beginning figure in particular seems to change not only the melody of the original, but also the rhythm slightly. I don't think that's bad, but it does feel incomplete, especially compared to Jones's more polished version. The arrangement credit for this one is unknown. Sun1Spesh2.mid is the special stage theme, and this version was arranged by our good friend Spiro Agnew. Remember that bit? Those tracks that had a similar metadata formatting, so I started calling them by a funny name? I feel like I established that bit and then the arranger didn't come up for like a dozen songs or something. Anyway, it's good. Sun1Sta1.mid is a cover of the Starlight Zone theme, and it's okay. That probably sounds harsh, and it is, because this is a perfectly serviceable version of the track, but there's a version later in this pack that I view as the iconic version, so this one always takes second place. It's good though, it's good. I give it a 3 out of 5 stars. Sun1Yar2 1.mid is the Spring Yard Zone theme, here arranged by Gerald Jones. I like it. I'm gonna let it play a minute here. Sun1Yard 1.mid is the Spring Yard Zone theme, here arranged by Spiro T. Agnew. I like it. I'm gonna let it play a minute here. Okay, are you ready? Because I have a theory. Did you notice how those two versions of the Spring Yard Zone theme were very similar? The Spiro Agnew version was very slightly different, but in a way that made it sound like it was actually just a slightly more incomplete version of the Gerald Jones version. Note that the instrumentation is identical between the two tracks and arranged in exactly the same order. I think that Spiro Agnew is actually Gerald Jones. I've actually been developing this theory since we first encountered Jones, back on the Green Hill Zone cover. Look at this metadata. The track name, the copyright, the by Sega, it's all the same. Again, I don't have 100% proof, but I think it's pretty likely that all the Spiro Agnew tracks we've been looking at here are actually by Gerald Jones as well. This is huge for the Sonic Arranger power rankings if we take this as true, but I'll have to leave that up to you, dear viewer. I can only give you the information. The final decision is yours. And with that, our tour of the Sonic 1 midis has come to a close. We are roughly halfway through the Sonic Gauntlet now, but before we dive into Sonic 2, let's treat ourselves to a little bit of a tangent. While it is true that the bulk of the sounds in Resource Pack 2 are MIDI files, there's other stuff in here as well. Specifically, there are 7 sound effects that are meant for use in your games. I don't have any information on where any of these effects come from, really, but if you have any leads, please leave a comment. So let's review all these. First is enginestart.mp3, a 20-second file which is so compressed it's almost unrecognizable as what it's supposed to be. It sounds more like Merzbow than any car I've ever driven, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Heartbeat.wave is an 8-second loop of a heart beating. It actually reflects a slightly elevated heart rate, as I count 16 beats in the 8-second loop, which works out to 120 BPM, a bit over the normal resting heart rate of 60 to 100. Lavaboil.wave is a 3-second loop of bubbling, sizzling lava, presumably intended to be used for ambience. I like the satisfying gloop gloop noises. Mammoth.wave is a peculiar addition to the pack as its use seems highly specific, but if you ever need the sound of a mammoth trumpeting, I guess it would come in handy. PhoneLoop.wave is interestingly named mostly because it seems like it would actually make a terrible loop. The sound has no opportunity to decay, so if played in a loop, it would sound like this. Waterboiling.wave is a less gloopy-bloopy version of Lavaboil, and therefore far inferior. It's fine for what it is, though. Finally, WolvesHowling.wave is a pack of wolves howling. It's actually kind of unsettling, and I suppose I could see some uses for it if you were making a werewolf game or something. Alright, with that scintillating tangent over, let's dive right back into our Sonic Gauntlet with Sonic 2, with music again by Masato Nakamura. Sun 2 Aqua 1.mid is the theme of the Aquatic Ruin Zone, and also the second of the background tracks that I used in Escape from Malkin. Because of this, I obviously have a nostalgic soft spot for it, and I still think it's an absolute jam. It was sequenced by Corian, who you'll remember from the Doomsday Zone arrangement from Sonic & Knuckles that we saw earlier. Sun 2 Cassie 1.mid is another Corian track, this time covering the Casino Night Zone. This song swings pretty hard if we're being honest. I kind of wish I had more to say about it. So have you guys watched any good videos lately? Please say yes. Sun 2 Che 3.1.mid is one of 3 renditions of the Chemical Plant Zone, and by far the funniest, owing to its use of the choir ooze and some other strange instrumentation choices. This is an interesting case though, because through circumstantial evidence, I mean, when isn't it? I think this is actually a work in progress of Sun 2 Chem 1.mid, which is a more complete version of the same idea, now with proper drums and better instrumentation. My tip-off here is the track numbering, as it looks like somewhere along the line, track 2 was deleted, so the track numbering skips directly from 1 to 3. The second version of the track was sequenced by our old friend Spiro Agnew, possibly aka Gerald Jones, which would also attribute the first version of the track to them too, assuming the chain of tenuous assumptions I've stacked atop each other can hold the weight of that claim. Finally, I think Sun 2 Churm 1.mid is yet another take on the same track, as it contains many nearly identical instrumental flourishes, albeit with some new ones added in, and the same track numbering quirk as the other 2 versions of the Chemical Plant Zone theme. This one is interesting because it's about 20 BPM slower than the other 2 versions, and therefore also much slower than the original track. However, from the sheer number of tracks, it does appear that this was the version that had the most added onto it, which leads me to believe that it was the newest of the 3 versions. The second version is by far the closest to the original song in terms of arrangement and instrumentation, but if my hunches are all correct, that means that this version was developed after that one, meaning that even after arriving at a close copy of the original track, Jones, or Agnew, opted to keep tinkering. Although I prefer the second version for its higher energy take, I still respect the urge to keep iterating on a thing even after you could have called it done. Next up, we have our 100th track. Woo! Sun2M1.mid is an arrangement of the Emerald Hill Zone theme by Gerald Jones, this time explicitly credited. Sun2End1.mid is the ending theme to Sonic 2, and is quite a satisfying conclusion-style theme. In fact, consider this entry a note to play this over the conclusion to this video. If I forget to do this, make sure to leave a comment on the video that says, "Snail Man, you hack!" But if I do remember, please leave a comment that says, "Good job, Snail Man!" Thanks. Sun2Espec1.mid is the special stage theme, here arranged by Gabby Gomez and AJ Freda. It's a fun arrangement of the song, although I find the instrumentation choices interesting. From the original, it seems like a no-brainer to use some sort of synth brass on the opening fanfare, but instead, Gomez and Freda opted to use the MIDI square wave sound, which makes it sound much more like the Waffles Adventure opening than anything else. Still a solid track, though. Sun2Hill1.mid is an arrangement of the Hilltop Zone theme, sequenced here by Dale Koch. Allegedly. Not that it's allegedly sequenced by Koch, that part is definitely true, it's clearly in the metadata, but allegedly it's supposed to be the Hilltop Zone theme. This track is barely recognizable at best. I can see similarities, but to call it a cover of the original feels like a stretch, and honestly I wouldn't be surprised if this were an original that just bore enough of a passing similarity to the Hilltop Zone theme to have been miscategorized and mislabeled. After all, we've seen similar things before, as with the Metaltech Earthsiege track getting mistaken for a Donkey Kong Country track earlier in this very video. This theory is also corroborated by the MIDI metadata itself, which says copyright 1997 Dale Koch, without mentioning Sonic 2 or Masato Nakamura at all. This track is apparently also somewhat of a meme in the MIDI community, and even has a wiki page on the Silvagunna Wiki, a comedic musical project that masquerades as a high-quality video game music re-upload channel. The joke of the video just being that this version of the Hilltop theme is so bad that it is the joke. Sun2Hillar1.mid is an arrangement of the Emerald Hill Zone theme by Gerald Jones. Didn't we just do this one? Yeah, we did, but this one is just that one again. And they're both only 45 seconds long for some reason, but it's the same 45 seconds, so just, I don't know. Sun2Mist1.mid is the Mystic Cave Zone theme, here arranged by Corian, and man oh man, this one is such a bop. It incorporates, the clown theme, the clown motif, whatever it's called. Entrance of the Gladiators Opus 68 by Julius F***ick? Okay. Sun2Oil1.mid is the Oil Ocean Zone theme and another Corian arrangement. I don't care for this tune as much just because the riff is pretty stereotypically in evoking Middle Eastern stereotypes. It uses the double harmonic major scale, which is also known as the Arabic scale, or basically, it's very stereotypical of how pop culture portrays West Asian countries. Of course, here tying into the oil level aesthetics of the Oil Ocean Zone. In his absolutely fantastic video essay, Orientalism, Desert Level Music versus Actual Middle Eastern Music, Persian world music YouTuber Faria Faraji details the ways in which musical elements from all across Western and South Asia are flattened together into desert sand cobra vibes. You should actually probably stop watching this video right now and go switch to that one, because I cannot stress enough how good it is. Seriously, go. Is everyone gone? Good, now I can stop caring about quality control and get this script finished up. Did you know this thing is 13,500 words already? Jesus Christ. Sun2Opt1.mid is a version of the options menu theme, arranged by Blaze Hedgehog. It's actually categorized not as a cover, but as a remix in the metadata, and I think that's actually accurate, as Hedgehog lends the thing a more orchestral instrumentation, taking away the snare and replacing it with a booming timpani. I like it. Sun2Sky2.1.mid is a light and airy rendition of the Sky Chase Zone theme, arranged by JD Harding. I like it for its minimalism, and it's actually a rare case where I prefer this version to the more bombastic and heavy arrangement by Gerald Jones, called Sun2Sky1.mid in the pack. That one certainly has its merits, but it just feels a bit much, and I like the breezier take by Harding personally. It's okay, Gerald, you can't win them all. Finally, for Sonic 2, we have Sun 2 Wing 1.mid, a Wing Fortress Zone arrangement that is uncredited to a sequencer. It's pretty good. Before we tackle the final stretch of the Sonic Gauntlet, I wanted to take a short break where I could talk about the music in the other resource packs. There isn't much. In the 5 resource packs, the only one with any music at all besides Resource Pack 2 is in Resource Pack 3, and you're never gonna believe what's in here. That's right, the MIDI DT folder of Yung Truong's music, created with assistance from Melody Razor, sitting in plain sight the whole time in Rezo 3. I just never thought to check this resource pack when I was on my search for the 1945 music, which kind of feels like traveling to another country to see a special kind of tree that was actually sitting in your local park the whole time. There's even a README with the full authorship information and email. After finding this, I wonder if the reason that I remembered RockOn.mid is just that I downloaded this and listened to it along with the rest of the songs 18 odd years ago, and it just lived in the very back of my head the whole time. I genuinely don't know. Besides this find, none of the other packs have any music in them whatsoever, so I guess it's time we steeled our nerves, gritted our teeths, and finished out the Sonic Gauntlet once and for all. The Sonic 3 score was composed by Brad Buxer, Bobby Brooks, Daryl Ross, Jeff Grace, Doug Grigsby III, Sirocco Jones, Howard Drawson, and doubtless others who inspired them, gave them the energy and encouragement they needed to be creative, supported them when they struggled, and allegedly Michael Jackson did something too. It's not clear. Sun 3 Azure 1.mid is a magical track, used in the Azure Lake stage that I believe I used on the title screen to Snailman's Search for Candy, and I have to stand by that placement because it's great. Paul Lappensee is back here on the arrangement, and it's fantastic. Sun 3 Ball 1.mid is another Lappensee arrangement, this time of the Balloon Park Zone theme. It is energetic and driving, and I remember using it all the time in random projects as a kid, though in my current feverish state, I can't seem to remember any specific ones. Ah well. Sun 3 Boss 1.mid is the Act 2 boss theme, and more great work from Paul Lappensee. Here, listen. Sun 3 Ka1.1.mid is the Carnival Night Zone Act 1 theme, this time sequenced by our old friend Spiro Agnew, aka Gerald Jones, allegedly. This one also incorporates the entrance of the Gladiators Opus 68 by Julius... Alright, I'm not getting into that again. Sun 3 D's... Okay. Sun 3 D's 1.mid is an arrangement of the Desert Palace theme, again by Paul Lappensee. Despite being called Desert Palace, this actually manages to avoid all the Orientalist tropes. It doesn't exactly use authentic instrumentation and compositional techniques from North Africa either, but hey, a win's a win. Sun 3 Hydra 1.mid is a cover of the Hydrocity Zone Act 2, arranged by Corian, and oh man, this one goes so hard. I'm never quite sold when the track starts, but as soon as the lead kicks in with those 6 slides, I am in. Sun 3 Marb 1.mid is another Paul Lappensee arrangement, this time of the Marble Garden Zone Act 1 theme. It is groovy as hell. Oh yeah. Okay, we're done with Sonic 3, and we just have a bit of miscellanea to get through before we are clear of the Sonic Gauntlet. We're in the home stretch. Sonic Robotnik NR 1.mid is the Sonic 1 boss theme, composed by Masato Nakamura, and arranged by Spiro Agnew, the 39th Vice President of the United States, whose name is an anagram of Praise Wong. What am I doing again? Sonic Robotnik NR 2.mid is Dr. Robotnik's theme from Sonic 2, and is this time arranged by John Weeks. It's been a while since we've seen him. This is a very faithful arrangement, as is typical of Weeks, and also is an absolute classic boss fight theme, so as usual, it's great. Sonic Robotnik NR 3.mid is the mini-boss theme from Sonic & Knuckles, arranged here by Corian. You'll recall earlier in the Gauntlet, we looked at a John Weeks arrangement of the same tune, and unfortunately, I have to give the win to this shootout to Weeks, just for that version's accuracy and the greater melodic definition to the arpeggios in the opening chords. It just gives the whole tune more energy, and it results in a better end product. Sonic 2 1.mid is actually the Chemical Plant Zone theme from Sonic 2, which you'll recall from there being 3 different versions of it earlier, and this is no exception, as this is, I believe, another variation on Sun 2 Chem 1.mid, which was the most faithful recreation of the original track. This one is mixed oddly quiet and doesn't seem to have a snare drum part on it though. Again, this one is technically uncredited, but if we assume it's another variation on the earlier versions of the Chemical Plant Zone theme we looked at, it's by Spiro Agnew, aka maybe Gerald Jones. Sonic 3 1.mid is Angel Island Zone Act 2 from Sonic 3. It has no attached arrangement credit. It's good though, I enjoy it. Finally, for our Sonic Gauntlet, we have Sonic War 1.mid. This one actually took me quite a bit of tracking down, and it was Shikiru Robot from the GameMaker Games Discord who finally found it. The original song is You Can Do Anything, aka Toot Toot Sonic Warrior by Masafumi Ogata from Sonic CD. The arranger is unknown, and I don't know if the MIDI version quite captures the magic of the original track, but I'm not ashamed to call the original what it is: peak. A perfect note to finally, once and for all, put it into the Sonic Gauntlet. Oh god, I'm so tired. To quickly wrap up our Sonic Arranger power rankings, I've prepared another pie chart. As you can see here, if we only go by the credits that are 100% solid, Paul Lapensee is the winner with 12 total compositions. However, if we presume Spiro T. Agnew and Gerald Jones are indeed the same person, he has a whopping 14 credits. 17 if you count the unlabeled tracks that I deduced were different versions of the same song. John Weeks, meanwhile, has a respectable 8 tracks, or 9 if our hunches are correct, and Corian comes in last with a respectable 7. Okay, now that we're done with that utterly brutal ordeal, let's take a little break. While I was working on the earlier parts of this script, one of the things I couldn't stop thinking about was a persistent thought flitting at the edge of my memory, almost like a dream. I remember at some point in my youth making a mixed CD of a handful of tracks from Resource Pack 2 and wrote on the disc, the best of Resource Pack 2. Recently I've been sick. My brain is broken. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I'm stuck at my parents' house, the place where all the discs from my childhood are. I looked through old games, ripped videos, stolen Weird Al albums, and I finally found it. The edges eroded away by time. I have a lot of CDs from this era, and several of them have succumbed to bit rot, so I held my breath as I slotted the CD into my computer, which mercifully still has a CD drive, and it worked. A file of 7 MIDIs labeled, quote, the best stuff, popped up. Dreamed.mid, Dreaming.mid, DreamW1.mid, Garfield.mid, Mortal Kombat.mid, and 2 songs we haven't covered yet. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think if I was making the CD today, I would add a few more tracks. KevTech for one, and probably a couple of the Sonic covers, at least once those don't give me war flashbacks. I will say though that past me had good taste. I made this CD when I was like 11 years old, and all of the tracks I picked still slap. One of the ones we haven't reached yet is, I think, still my favorite of the entire pack. And the sooner we get back on track, the sooner we can get to that gem. So, having covered the best MIDI mix CD that has ever been made by an 11-year-old who then went on to make a video about it 16 years later, let's get back to the task at hand, and finish up the last 6 tracks we have to cover in this project. Spider-Man.mid is a cover of Spider-Man, the animated series theme. Now, this is not the better-known 1960s cartoon opening theme by Paul Francis Webster and Bob Harris, but instead the one from the then-contemporary 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series, which was composed by Shuki Levy and famously featured Aerosmith's Joe Perry. Starlight1.mid is from Sonic. I actually wanted to touch on this one briefly, as I referenced it earlier in the video. This is a perfectly serviceable version of the track, but there's a version later in this pack that I view as the iconic version, so this one always takes second place. So, yeah, that. Surf2.mid is a version of the Surf theme from Pokemon Red and Blue, composed by Junichi Masuda. There's no arrangement credit for this one, unfortunately. Okay, now let's get to some real good music. TechRap.mid is an original techno track composed by Kevin Newman, who you'll remember from KevTech earlier in this video, and oh my god, it's so good. KevTech was already great, but this is even better. This is one of the other two tracks that was on my Best of Rezo 2 mix CD, and it absolutely earned its place there. I think this was, and remains, my single favorite track in the entire pack. I'm actually extremely annoyed that I can't seem to find Kevin Newman's presence on the modern internet, or indeed any trace of him besides these two tracks, because he is clearly incredibly talented, and I would love to hear more of his work, if it's out there. As always, if anyone has a lead on this, drop a comment. I can't tell you how many times I would change all the instruments around, this track as a kid. I just couldn't get enough of it. The opening pitch-bended ah, the syncopated inverted chord shapes, hands down, this is some of the best that MIDI as a medium has to offer. Full stop. It's just so good. To Love You More.mid is a cover of To Love You More by Celine Dion. It was arranged by T. Mondin. This is all I am contractually obligated to say on this matter. And finally, the final MIDI in this entire pack, and the very final entry in my coveted 11-year-old self's power ranking of the best of the GameMaker Resource Pack 2 is X-Files.mid. This, is the X-Files theme. Like from the memes. It was originally composed by Mark Snow and arranged here by Frank Perot and modified by Andy at ocdemon.co.uk. It's great for all the reasons that people have always known the X-Files theme was great, and the reasons it still endures to this day. I don't know if it would make my best list if I was making one today, but it's certainly solid, and I still enjoy listening to it a great deal. And we're done. 129 MIDIs, with 77 that have full arrangement credits, an impressive 60%, and 12 more that we have a pretty good guess. 33 tracks, we have positively identified the source of the composition itself, but the arranger is sadly unknown, and finally, we still have 7 tracks that I just have no idea where they come from at all. I'll probably make a standalone video that covers these 7 in depth to see if I can get the word out without people having to watch an hour-plus long video, but I need a bit of rest first. As I'm writing this, the script is 37 pages long. I do not look forward to reading all this in my current state. My throat is pretty sore, and my voice is totally shot. But I'll get it together. I always do. It's just, after this whole journey, I still feel incomplete. After all this work, I thought that I would feel like I knew the Resource Pack 2, that I had learned everything there was to know about it, and done everything there was to do. But I don't. And it's not the few tracks that are left unidentified. It's more like, in the process of dissecting every piece of information about every song in this thing, I lost the spark, the passion, the sheer joy of enjoying the work of others for no other reason than that I like to listen to it. I think I know what I have to do. And as always, thank you for watching. And I'll see you in the next one.